Hello, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here. And I have to say, I'm a young American. I'm only 17 years old in American life, years. And in this short time that I've been in the US, I realized that a very good way to connect with the American audience is to tell a good sports story. So I'm going to start my talk, even though it's about specialty coffee and luxury and how the two relate. I want to give you my story that comes from the sports field. And these are my protagonists. On the right-hand side, we have Helen Maroulis, a freestyle wrestler who won the Rio Olympics in 2016. And she won it against Saoki Yoshida, who and still is, she retired, but one of the most amazing wrestlers of all time. Now, when Maroulis was preparing for the Olympics, she knew that the only way for her to get the gold was to win against Yoshida. And what Maroulis and her coaches were doing, in fact, for years, because Yoshida was already a star internationally, was to watch a lot of videos and try to analyze the technique of her opponent. And they were doing it over and over and over, and somehow she couldn't get to have this breakthrough that she needed to win. Until she had an epiphany. And the epiphany was that it must be something else that the coaches were telling Yoshida and that she couldn't understand because she was not speaking Japanese. So she learned, I'm not saying that she's fluent, but she learned a few words of Japanese, and she watched a lot of new videos trying to understand not what was the techniques that the coaches were transmitting to Yoshida, but actually what were some of Yoshida's facial expressions, what her eyes were saying. It wasn't about angles, it wasn't about power, it wasn't about technique. It was about that emotional and cultural connection that came through language and through the connection that came between the coaches and the athlete. The rest is history. She won the Olympics. And she won because she realized that if she only limited herself to learning functional, practical, factual aspects of her opponent's trade, she would never be able to overcome this big challenge. And so now that I told you my sports story, the sports story relates to what I'm going to explain to you in the next few minutes, because my whole thesis in luxury and luxury marketing is that companies that are successful are those who are able to translate culture and create some sort of creative strategy that then charms, appeals to the consumer, and brings them in. Now, I have been in this space for almost 15 years, and I've worked in different industries on purpose because I don't believe that, in my case, specialization in one specific industry is good in luxury. Luxury is a very creative field where a lot of cross-pollination of ideas happens, and in fact, the more industries one masters, the better it is to understand how to be competitive. So one thing that happened for me is that after a lot of work and a lot of academic research, in one of my first articles that came out in 2016, I gave a definition of luxury. And I have been using this definition in the classroom with my students at NYU to create business case studies that prove it. And so how can we use some of these elements of this terminology as they apply to specialty coffee? Well, you see up there a lot of words that I hope, and especially for me, since I went through the morning session today, I know that these terms relate to what I heard this morning. One is rarity, and we know that specialty coffee farms are unique, each one of them, and each type of coffee that comes from the different countries. We know that the field has beauty in it because we heard beautiful stories. We heard about spirituality of all things today. And then we have culture in there. And culture, I still think, is the least utilized. It is underutilized in specialty coffee in terms of marketing. And I think this is, in fact, the bridge that is going to impact your customers, not only on the physical level, which, of course, coffee being a beverage, of course, we understand it physically, but the goal here will be to move you beyond the emotional, because emotional sometimes is easy. It is what a lot of mass market companies do to tap into our easy emotions, happiness, sadness. We want to achieve intellectual bonding with the customer. So now, could that work? Yes, the Swiss have done it, right? The Swiss, in their dairy farming, they have convinced us that their products are good because their cows are happy. So why not coffee, right? So there must be something there that we're not doing yet. We're missing it. And maybe I give you a few ideas today on how to think about this. Now, the goal here is to take you into the luxury environment that I have the privilege to live every day, kind of. But before I do that, actually, I want again to emphasize that I don't want you to think about today's lessons as practical things that we go back and check, implement, because luxury is not prescriptive. That's number one. And number two, that we need to take these learnings and try to see how any cultural nuances that come from our particular country, particular region, particular way of doing things in specialty coffee can perhaps lead into that creative competitive advantage that differentiates your brand from other brands. And then you'll ask me, why now? Why should we do this now? Well, because a lot of the things that I heard this morning are things that other industries are already adopting in the way they talk to the consumer. So there is one brand in apparel, for example, that doesn't talk about sustainability. So we don't want to fall back into something that appears to be greenwashing for the consumer. We want to move beyond it. And finally, what else? Well, I don't know what else. I hope I inspire you today with the pictures and the stories I'll show you. But the thing is that luxury brands do something that is really, well, expensive, but really inspiring for people. There is a very special bonding that happens between the consumer and the luxury brand. Before we move up market, let's stay a little bit in the premium market. Now, my opinion as an outsider, I'm not in your trade. As an outsider, I believe that most specialty coffee brands compete in the premium market. What is the premium market? It is an amazing market. And in the premium market, we have exceptional product, like the product you all trade in, specialty coffee. We do have unmet needs. That is where the consumer goes to, for example, find fair trade coffee that they couldn't get before in the mass market. So this is also something very important. And of course, we have outstanding service. If there is anything that is really exceptional as the hallmark of your industry is the relationships that you have been building with your consumers and the experiences that you impart on them. So usually that comes with the continued direct relationships that you're building with your customers. But also what is interesting about the premium market is that in any industry, we always look at the premium market to see what kind of retail innovation is happening. Usually it comes from technology, it doesn't have to, but I think this is where people are more comfortable. They don't feel that they're competing only on commodities, and so they do a lot of innovative stuff. Now, you would say this is a pretty good place to be in, and I would say no, it isn't. And it isn't because this is exactly what your consumer knows. They know that you're doing all these things. And while they come to the premium market to get a really exceptional quality product and retain value from all these good things that you're doing in the world, actually what the consumer has in mind when they come to the premium market is the value that they're going to retain. And the value that they're going to retain is always commensurate with the exceptional quality that they also get through the product or the experience or the service. And of course, that is, has some relationship with the price. Now, interestingly to me, this morning I learned about the prices of coffee all over the world. It is a proof. If you were here this morning, you know that I'm talking about the premium market, right? All the prices very similar. How come? Everyone benchmarking against each other, and that is a very dangerous place to be. And it is a very dangerous place to be because then the consumer's mindset gets into the mode of compare and contrast. And compare and contrast is something that is a remnant of the commodities market. So there is a great danger there to lose someone to the competitor if you're not able to explain to them what is the value that you bring to the market. Here comes the luxury market. Now, in the luxury market, the brands reign supreme. You recognize some of the brands that I have here. You may own some of the brands that I have here. You may be dreaming of owning some of the brands that I have here. But what these brands are doing, and they're doing it really well, is that they create magic for their consumers. And each one is doing it differently. And what is this magic? This magic is to create such a well-protected environment for the brand, such an aura about the brand, a dream, an aspiration that no other good will ever be satisfactory to the consumer unless they come and buy from your brand. And so the one thing that the magic proves, and has proved over the years, even in times of recession, because in times of recession, luxury brands are still doing really well, which is mind-boggling, is that luxury is not comparative. Luxury is superlative, which means I want a Chanel bag, but I also want an Hermes bag. And don't tell me to swipe the two, right? There is no point. So let's think of how to create magic. And in fact, I will show you 6 examples today on how magic can be created. And the magic that these luxury brands are creating, they're doing it in a very interesting omni-channel, metaverse, they're everywhere, because they're trying to get in touch with the cultural pioneer. The cultural pioneer is the new luxury consumer. Why cultural pioneer? Well, the cultural pioneers tend to be younger, and they tend to be more creative. Now, why does that happen? This is not something that you or I control. This happens because of the major forces in the world: technology, trust funds, trust fund babies, a lot of wealth in certain places, the gig economy that has allowed a lot of young people to get into the marketplace in younger ages and actually make a lot of money, which then they turn around and they spend on luxury products. Now, the cultural pioneer, according to the Boston Consulting Group, is someone who has very specific values, and the values act as a filter when they first go to market. They tend to be a little bit more liberal in terms of ideology, but the values as a first filter cover all the mandatory, what I was saying earlier comes from the premium market, some more practical, functional stuff. So if we go back to the sports example, Helen Maroulis was thinking initially about the premium market characteristics of wrestling, and then she went into the cultural interpretation. These people like being different, not just to show off that they are different, but because they have learned something that other people don't know yet. We will learn it eventually, but these people are interested in niche ideas, niche movements, niche ways of producing culture, and niche communities, which is extremely important. And so what they're looking to find in these brands is expression, innovation, creativity, and certainly community. So this, I would say, is the new phase, the new wave of the new luxury consumer. And I think that a lot of your brands are already halfway there to attracting a lot of these consumers. But I think that we need to work a little bit on the idea of magic. And so I have 6 brands. They're very well-known luxury brands, but from each one I want to give you a lesson to take away today. And I start with Louis Vuitton because Louis Vuitton does not try to sell us product, even if we go to them and eventually we come out with a bag that has the logo on it. But what they try to sell to us is a brand universe. And this brand universe is so immersive that in effect, whether you are in the boutique or whether you're online, it becomes a holistic experience that clearly communicates a design philosophy. What is design philosophy? Design philosophy is the feeling that the designer wants to leave with the consumer when the design is finished. And don't assume that all brands want to leave us feeling happy. Happiness can be the feeling that one designer wants to communicate, but there are other good feelings. There is the feeling of surprise, that's a good feeling. Drama, and so on and so forth, right? So Louis Vuitton has been doing this really well and creates these immersive environments where in essence the consumer would like to have their entire life happen within the brand. Wouldn't that be wonderful, right? That means a lot of brand loyalty and a lot of cash flows. Then there is Hermès. Hermès, when they present themselves, their tagline is contemporary craftsmen since 1837. Now, a novice researcher would say the emphasis is on the craftsman, but it's not about craftsmanship. This, they have done it, they know it well. What is important for Hermès is the word contemporary. So how do you remain contemporary in 1837, 1937, 2037? You experiment with technology, or you experiment with a field that is outside that craft that you have mastered. So think about what is it that you have mastered in your particular type of producing specialty coffee, and what other industry is a peripheral industry that could bring innovation into what you're doing. For example, for them, they got into coding. This is cut off. It is a screenshot of a video that came out from the brand in 2012 when coding was not part of the luxury vocabulary. But I bring it up because Hermès, a brand that produces fashion and leather accessories, was doing advanced coding when Google was also competing in this area, trying to find functional solutions. Right? So you see the equivalence here that one is an example of analytical thought, the other is an example of creative thought, and we need both in life, but which one stands out? Do we love Google or do we love Hermès? Right? It's the creative that stands out. So the creativity comes from a cross-pollination of these different fields of innovation. And you can have innovation that starts with technology, as in the previous example, but it could be innovation that is scientific, or even artistic, or even philosophical, which is a little too researched. But this is where Gucci is trying to, and succeeding, in reaching out to this new luxury consumer, the cultural pioneer. And how are they doing it? They try to appear in front of the consumer in a way with different types of products at different price ranges so that many people with different purchasing power can communicate. So they become more inclusive without losing the exclusivity that comes with the aura of luxury and the aura of that dream that they are producing. And this is the example from their latest restaurant that opened in Korea, and where you see images that remind us of the digital world, right? Smiling emojis, but they are used in food production, creating the same experience that a person would have in a Gucci boutique in downtown New York City, for example. Another example that is pertinent to what your industry is facing is the idea of a product, of an iconic product. And so Rolex, of course, has been producing iconic products for quite a while, and they present themselves to us as a gallery with many of these iconic products. And one question that I want you to have about your specific type of coffee is, who is your icon? Is it the coffee bean? Is it the coffee process? Is it the person, we were listening to a few interesting talks this morning, the person behind the story that brings the coffee to you? can you create the story around this icon and make sure that you remind the consumer of these icons in different intervals throughout time? Then we have the example of Cartier. Cartier, of course, also a legacy brand with a very long history. And the role that they have assumed on our behalf is to be cultural agents. And that means that they present themselves to the consumer at in a relationship that is based on a voice of authority. They are the authority, and they teach us and we learn, and they are so specific about discovering parts of their own past that they have almost the precision of an archaeologist. But they also have the ambition of a Hollywood film producer, and so everything that they do, their shows, the way they present their boutiques, the fact that the creative experiments that they do are like the exhibitions and the shows are so important, they become part of the popular conversation, right? Not to stay within the confines of specialty coffee and specialty coffee enthusiasts, but to create things that are so interesting and so creative that the New York Times would write about it. And the final example is Chanel, because Chanel has had a very long history, 110 years in the fashion industry. And today, the brand is more than the sum of its parts. And what are the parts? The parts are Coco Chanel, the person, the legend, Karl Lagerfeld, the legend. And today, they have a different creative director, Virginie Viard. And you would think, how does she, someone who was unknown up until 2 years ago, stands in this very heavy history of the brand? Well, she's able to do that because the brand has already been articulated for them. The brand universe, the codes, and all these things exist for her. And so she continues interpreting and imagining, and she's the imaginator the same way a film director and auteur would direct the rest of our life. And that is what the consumer has come to expect from Chanel. We would want to be able to go to the supermarket dressed in Chanel dresses. And this is the philosophy behind the brand as well. And so here we realize that, again, when you move the brand away from this functional relationship between person and product, and you take this product that has to be of exceptional quality and you elevate it to something that is truly creative, and usually creativity that has received some influences from other fields of creativity. It cannot be only within your own market, it cannot only be within your own trade. This is where these cultural pioneers believe that they have discovered something unique, something funny, something interesting, and the following continues. So what can we learn from this very short, and I wish I had more time to go in depth, basically listing of these companies that have created very specific nuances of a cultural landscape that is the contemporary landscape that we all experience today. The first thing is to move beyond premium, to move beyond practical and functional offerings, and think about your brand and what the magic of the brand is or could be. Now, once you decide that this is so, remember that brands are not only the graphic design. We heard a lot about experiences today. I was particularly interested in the example that came from Vietnam and showed a coffee shop that was reminiscent of a Berlin-based coffee shop. And so think about these sort of connections that happen because creative people are engaged in architecture that has to do with operations, that has to do with graphic design, that has to do with a lot, which is one main learning here. The magic cannot only be resting on the hands of a graphic designer who is responsible for your logo. You need to rethink the whole universe and what are these points where you meet your consumer to make sure that it's always magical, it's always aspirational, and you always attract them, right? You have to pull them in. Now, once you have articulated the magic, it is in fact very, I wouldn't say very, but it is much easier to find your tribe. And the tribe are the people who are specifically interested in these types of creativity, in the nuances of culture that you're articulating, and they will come, they will find you, and the tribe will grow. And the final thing is also very important. A lot of specialty coffee happens because you're still trying to instruct us on how to drink a good cup of coffee. Now, instruction is great, but instruction is not inspirational, it's not aspirational. So we need to move the narrative of what is an excellent cup of coffee beyond the idea of this cup of coffee is going to do good in the world, and perhaps reverse this and say, the magic comes because so much good has already been done in the world, and this is where we want your experience to move, so that the consumer is inspired to be the better person that they want to be in real life, which is what motivates us all through desire, right, and motivation. And so I hope that was entertaining, if not anything else, and I thank you for listening to me.